Here we go. You may all get a thing you need to take down. Y'all are old hands at this though. So one of your handouts this morning, Zoomers, I didn't send this to you again. You probably got it earlier, but one of your handouts is our schedule for the fall. We have a rotation of, I haven't even counted how many different people who will be helping to lead this class. So you've got them listed there by Sunday, but also the chapters that we'll be looking at. So that is, I'm not going to give you one of these every week. So if you want to know, you should hold on to this. I might put it in the Friday email. We will see. So, but let's dive right in. We have, I'm only covering one chapter, but we have so much material to cover. So I invite you, you know what, you can turn to the Gospel of John if you want to. I'm going to say a few things about it to get us started. It starts on page 91 in the Bibles we have here in class. But I want to start with just to touch on a little bit of background. So some of the things that we often cover about any book of the Bible when we start to learn it. So who wrote the book of John, the Gospel according to John?
The disciple whom Jesus loved.
Possibly the disciple whom Jesus loved. Was his name John? I don't know. Was he really the one who wrote it? We don't know that. What we know is that within the gospel, it says that it was his testimony that is written in this gospel. Whether that means he wrote it or not is not entirely clear. So we, early Christian leaders decided that John must be the one who wrote this, and we named it that, and so that's what we call it. So I will use that word, that name, but we're going to hold that name lightly and know that it is more or less symbolic. So when was this written? It was written after the fall of the temple. There have long been suggestions that it must have been written later than the other three gospels because it seems more sophisticated and more spiritual. Those are generalizations, and we do not have to hold them with any more grasp or any more tight grasp than we do what the name of the author is. It is not actually different in ways that require that it was written later. So somewhere between 70, 75, and 90 AD, most likely. Some will argue that the Gospel of John is more spiritual, but when they do that, they're ignoring all of the very well-developed characters and very human portrayals of Jesus in this gospel. So I would invite us to discard that stereotype of the Gospel of John because I don't think you will find it all that helpful. The audience that John was addressed to was most likely primarily Jewish Christians who had become followers of Jesus. They had most likely been kicked out of their synagogues for becoming followers of Jesus. At some point, they may have been a community that emigrated to Ephesus. Why have you heard of Ephesus? Because Paul wrote a letter to the Ephesians, right? Which was the people who lived in Ephesus. So that may have been that same community. Once they moved to Ephesus, they're going to start having some Gentile convert friends, right? So it may have been a mixed community, but in general, the audience mostly started out as Jewish, but they have not exactly voluntarily broken away. They went a different way and were not respected for their differences of opinion. So there's a fair amount of tension there between these newly Christian Jews and the Jews that did not decide to follow Jesus. A lot of that tension is going to come up. We're going to see that reflected, okay? Here is where we come to our note of warning, all right? One of the things we need to be aware of in the Gospel of John is that it has been used over the centuries to justify anti-Semitism and violence against Jewish people because of the way it talks about the Jews. The people who listened to the Gospel of John were also Jews, okay? So it does not make sense for us to use the way this gospel talks about the Jews, who were basically set up as the opponents here, to justify any kind of prejudice against Jews. So better translations in those spots might be the Judeans or the Jewish leaders, but we need to keep in mind it was a very small subsection of all of the Jews that John was talking about when he uses that phrase, okay? Just want to set that out at the beginning. We need to make sure that we do not use any of that to perpetuate ancient conflicts. So, want to talk about structure just a little bit. This structure is not really reflected, unfortunately, in the way we divided up the material for teachers because we did not have the luxury of doing that. But the Gospel of John is generally divided into 4 parts: a short one, a long one, and a short one. So today we're going to talk about the prologue. It is the first 18 verses of the first chapter. And then we get into what we call the book of signs, okay? The book of signs goes from chapter 1, verse 19 through the end of chapter 12. Now, what is a sign in John? What do other gospels call these? They call them miracles. John doesn't really use the word miracle. He uses the word sign because signs do what? They point towards something, right? I mean, not every sign. Some signs are trying to sell you something. That also actually would be applicable here. But generally, scholars talk about the signs in John as being miracles that point toward something. They point toward the incarnation. They point toward the glory, the power of God. What is interesting in the book of signs is that most of the signs that Jesus does in John are then followed by what we call a discourse, which is Jesus explaining that was a sign and it was pointing at this. So he doesn't want you to be confused in John, right? Like don't mistake me here. What I just did meant that, okay? There are some interesting little things. The book of signs covers 3 years. The next part is called the book of glory, and it covers 3 days, right? So the action is over a long span of time, and then all of a sudden we get almost as many chapters just about the last 3 days. Mm-hmm.
I love school. I'm so glad I'm going back to school. Teacher, did you just get off of chapter 1 and just?
I'm talking about the structure right now.
Okay, yeah.
I'm right here.
Okay, yeah, you just jumped to something else, right?
I'm giving you a picture of the whole thing right this second.
Okay,
we're not in chapter 1.
Yeah, thank you. You jumped
right.
something else.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
So we have the book of signs. How many signs are there? 7. Yes.
Signs.
You know that 7 is an important number in the Bible, right? We got 3, well, probably more than 3, but we have 3 is a significant number, 3 years, 3 days, the Trinity. 7 is an important number. How many days of creation? 7, exactly. Okay, so 7 signs. That number is going to keep coming up. Okay, so after the book of signs, we have what is called the book of glory. Okay, and again, that covers 3 days. That's the very end. So the other thing about that book of glory is that the scope has narrowed a lot. The whole first part, Jesus is talking to the crowds, okay? In the book of glory, the audience has narrowed, and it is mostly, he is talking just to the disciples. So it's a much more intimate section there. Except that also goes all the way through chapter 20, so all the way through crucifixion. Obviously that part involves other people. And the resurrection. And then the very last chapter, the setting actually changes. It comes back, it's sort of a reminder of the point, you would say. So they call that the epilogue, chapter 21. Okay, how are we doing on time? We have 1 minute to cover things to watch for. And these are things to watch for through the entire fall, okay? The I ams. What is the I am? Where does that come from? Who is I am? God is I am, right? I am
Burning bush.
I am who I shall be, right? See, that's our alarm to get started on prologue. So there are 7 times in the Gospel of John, 7 again, right? There's 7 times where Jesus says, I am something. I am, what's the thing you've heard him say? I am
The life.
the life. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. Okay, so there are 7 of those. There's 7 other times where he basically just says, I am. Now, in our Bible, we're not going to recognize that because almost every time it happens, he actually, the English translation says, I am he, when they're like, where is Jesus of Nazareth, right? The garden, it's like, I am he. But in the original language, it really is a reiteration of those words of God when God revealed God's name. I am who I am.
I'm right here, I'm right next to you.
I am he. So 7 of each kind of those.
Ooh. Oh my.
All right, we already talked about signs and discourses, so watch for that. There's a miracle, there's an explanation. I think they don't all have them, but your other teachers can tell you that part. So, and then the other thing that I want to suggest that we watch for as we go through here are the characters. The stories in John of Jesus interacting with people are much longer than most of the stories in the other gospels, which means the characters, the people besides Jesus, have a lot more to say. They're more developed as people and as characters, which means in theory, they might be more relatable, right? Like if you get to know a character more, you can think, oh yeah, I could see myself saying that or doing that, or that reminds me of this other person that says that or does that, whichever. So contrary to the idea that John is terribly abstract and spiritual, there are also a lot of very earthy stories where Jesus is interacting in very human ways. So watch for those stories. Watch for the stories you connect to. There may be characters in this gospel that you connect to. We're going to come back to that at the end. Very briefly before we go on, there are some things. What is missing is not a good question because it implies that these things should have been here just because they're in the other 3 gospels. But there are some things that are in the other 2 or 3 gospels that are not in John. Can we name some of those things?
A birth narrative.
A birth narrative. That might be true. Yes, we'll come back to that in a moment as well. But there's, Luke has a whole story, right? About the shepherds and Mary's in the barn and all of that. What are anything else you know of that is not in the Gospel of John? I'm going really fast, Zoomers, so you might have to holler if you want to add something in. I'm going to slow down in just a second. We're only 3 minutes past our deadline. So a couple of the other things that are missing, there are not really parables in the Gospel of John. There is no Last Supper scene. Communion, the institution of communion is replaced with what in John? It's not a hand washing, it's a foot washing. Okay, so that Thursday night scene in John is not the Last Supper, it's a foot washing. The timeline in the other Gospels is also different than John. John is spread out over 3 years. The other 3 seem like they're only spread out over a year. So there are some serious differences. There's very little material in John that is also in the other Gospels. There's one story that is similar, I think. Is that right? I think that's right.
Feeding of the 5,000.
Yeah, the feeding of the 5,000 is the one miracle / sign that is in all 4 Gospels. And someone will get to talk with you about that. So let's get into the prologue. Who would like to read the prologue for us? The first 18 verses. Somebody have a nice loud voice this morning?
And John?
Mike, you want to do it?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was this light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light which enlightens everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me." From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known.
Okay, thank you. So, that was very deep, right? Most of what I'm gonna work through with you today is based on the idea that those 18 verses cover all of the theological themes in the entire Gospel of John. So if you didn't come to any day this fall but today, this was the day to come, because we're gonna cover all of it, okay? Good job. So I want to just name some of those, and I want to say this is based very heavily on the work of Caroline Lewis's commentary on John, her preaching commentary, along with a number of other sources. But so there are two probably most important themes, and we're getting at them there right at those very first words, right? You have them listed here. So we have the origin. Did not spell that right. It's not a scholar. It's a place you come from. The origin of Jesus, right? What does it say in those first few verses?
With God, he was God.
That part. In the beginning, Jesus was where?
With
Who was he
God,
with?
he was God.
Jesus was with God, right? So the origin, the relationship Jesus has with God, and also Jesus's identity. And there are a lot of identity things there, right? Markers, what you said. Right, so you see those things that it's saying, who is Jesus? According to those first, Jesus is
God.
God. Jesus is God, right? Jesus is the Word is God, Jesus is God, right? All of those things. So this gospel is very clear that Jesus is God, right? But there's more. What is what is Jesus' relationship with God? And we're going to come back to this. I know one of Jennifer's favorite words. Jesus abides with God because Jesus is God. Remember that whole thing you had about the word abide? I'm not making this up. I don't remember.
Okay,
this.
if you say so.
I know you were really into it right after that assembly. We already talked about it. So this major theme of Jesus's origin, Jesus's relationship with God, and Jesus' identity. That's all kind of wrapped up together, right? Our identity is very much rooted in where we came from, right? It's very much rooted in our relationships. That helps us know who we are, okay? So that's all kind of one big thing. Even bigger news, the incarnation, right? The Word made flesh, okay? familiar are you with the word incarnation? Does that feel like a familiar word? Do you know, have you ever had carne asada? Right? That's where this comes, well, it doesn't come from carne asada. But it's made flesh, right? See, God in flesh, in meat. God made meat, if you want to be that graphic about it. Not necessarily God in carne asada, right? God in human flesh. So the incarnation is like, that is John's biggest deal, okay? And that the incarnation has two purposes. They're right there on their sheet, so tell me what they are. What is the first thing the incarnation is supposed to do?
Revealing God.
Oh, God, right?
Yes.
So revelation of God, reveal God, and then the other purpose goes a different direction. What is the other purpose of the incarnation?
Salvation of humanity.
Say it again, Cheryl.
Salvation of humanity.
Salvation of humanity, you know what I mean? Okay. So I'm marking these letters for a purpose. We have a test in a minute, so there you go. All right, one final very important emphasis for John is the next thing on our list, and you actually heard it in here, right? It's funny the way John, the gospel writer, supposedly that's his name, and John, he doesn't call him John the Baptist right here, right? There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a what? Witness. A witness. This is huge for John. Our point, people who follow Jesus, is to witness to the fact that Jesus is God and that the incarnation reveals God and is our salvation. Okay, so this witness, you don't just get the information and then you're done. Right? We will see, we actually won't see, we're not going to read most of it, but the whole rest of this chapter, everybody's always saying, come and see, come and see. What or not, we'll come and see. Okay? So it's not just information. This is not intended to be information you keep to yourself by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so an extended theological theme then is related to this theme of salvation of humanity. What does the incarnation make possible? You've got it right there in verse 12. Gave power to what? Those who believe. Gave power to do what though?
Become children of God.
To become children of God, exactly. So this relationship that Jesus has with God, not the part where Jesus is God, but the part that Jesus abides with God, we can do that too, okay? By becoming children of God. So that's sort of a sub-theme. There is a different category of themes that we see in here as well, okay? And they're what did I call the one here? Image or abstract themes. The first set of these are harking back to the Hebrew scriptures. So what is the opposite of a trick question? What is the first thing that hits you that reminds you of the Old Testament? She's giving it away in the beginning, right? Right?
Yeah,
What
in
does
the
that
beginning.
sound like? That sounds like Genesis, right?
Genesis.
So these Hebrew themes, John is very much connecting the incarnation to the original creation, right? It's not that Jesus was at the beginning of the creation. Jesus was there even before the beginning, because all of the things that got created, they got created through Jesus, right? This is not a scientific explanation. I can't really tell you what that means exactly, but there are these two Hebrew themes. The first is creation. Did I put the second one on here? I think I did. This idea of tabernacle. Do you know what the tabernacle was? when the Israelites were on their 40-year journey, they had God with them.
In the ark.
I mean, was it a box? It was a tent. It was a thing that they kept the presence of God with, probably a backpack, really, I don't know. And it was called the tabernacle. And that was how God lived among them during that whole thing. So these parts here in, where are we? Did I write down verses? Verse 14a, my notes say, the word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory. Yes, it's just the first part. The word became flesh, it's that, and lived among us. So that is also, that's kind of the tabernacle reference there. Well, this is the new way that God is living with us, is
Jesus.
is the new tabernacle, is
Jesus.
himself, really. Okay. Couple other of
Rebecca.
these. Yes, John.
Quick question, what, do we know what was in the tabernacle or have an idea? What was in it?
Well, there was
That's like,
power.
there was what?
There was so much power that if you touched it, you would die. It
That-
was like electrical power.
So,
I mean,
but this is prehistory.
No,
So do we know what was in it? I mean,
The presence of
the
God.
presence of God was in it, John. That's all I got for you.
So it was more than we could understand.
Exactly.
Yeah, God himself was in it.
So,
You know, once when they would have it on these poles, wooden poles, that did not transmit the energy. And I know that there were scientific experiments, they couldn't replicate it because it had pure gold, it was too costly to replicate it. So they replicated a miniature, and it put off an electrical charge that was dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at one time when they were trying to lift it up, when it almost fell, a well-meaning helper tried to lift it up and was killed.
so
I
yes.
mean, you know, there was zinc and there was gold and it specified, it was a battery.
There you go. It was
You know,
a
I
battery.
don't know what it was.
So yeah,
but
it was power.
It was power.
It was presence.
Presence.
Anyway, I read
Wonder
in-
working power.
just an offshoot, I won't go any further, but I ran into a fellow dog walker who's a little bit on the crazy side. And he stopped me at that particular point, like he just had urgent news. And somebody had told him, I guess he was either in Jerusalem or someplace, and he was talking about people would die and things, and he knew, or somebody knew, you understand, I wasn't dealing with a guy with all his oars in the water. And he was talking about somebody knew where it was. It was a very important thing to him.
Yes.
I mean, very important.
Well, because it's the presence of God. But again, John is saying Jesus is the new tabernacle. Okay. A couple other things here. You heard the word light a lot, right? I apologize. It's not more legible. The light shines. It's the light for all people. The darkness did not overcome it. So there is a lot of, and also then that is connected to the part in verse 10. He was in the world and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, but his own people did not accept him. So there's a lot of this contrast. Again, keeping in mind that tension, right, between the newly converted Christian Jews and the Jews who did not convert. Okay, so there's a line being drawn here. That's the world where the light was not accepted. And over here, we are Jesus' own, and we have seen the light and we have the light. So there's a lot of this light versus darkness. And it's almost an us versus them kind of tension there. So, and then just the final theme that Lewis at least explains is this idea of abundance. You're going to probably get into this next week in chapter 2. What do you think, Tessa? How much wine is there? There is an abundance of wine. So many themes, you all. It is very dense. This prologue is very dense. It's trying to cover. But what is the most important part here? These are the three things John is trying to do. John is trying to witness to us the importance of Jesus's identity and what it means that God is now, that the Word, which is God, is made flesh, lives among us. That does what? It reveals God and is the salvation of humanity.
But we have to accept our adoption.
It's true.
I mean,
Yes, and that adoption language will come in.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly where. So now it's time for your test.
okay.
Do you have a pen? If you don't have a pen, take a pen. And I want to invite you. Julie said that there is no birth narrative in John, and that is mostly true. Here, John, you're going to need your own copy for this. So, if you turn over your handout, you will discover the words of a Christmas carol. And I will tell you, this is totally stolen from the other major book I was using, which I did not write down. We're going to sing this song, but if you don't sing that much because you're writing, that's okay. Because what I want you to do is mark these letters every time you see a theme. Okay? There's too many things that start with R, so I had to make those two letters. All right. I see something about the origin of Jesus, you mark an O. If there's something about the incarnation, put in I see. Something about relationship with God. Oh, what was mine? Identity, something about revelation, something about salvation, something about creation or living among us, anything about light. So many of the themes are in this song. I am not going to grade your papers, do not worry, but let's sing this song. Can we sing this song? Can you sing with me? I know it's early. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies. When the joy hosts proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Christ by highest heaven adored, Christ the everlasting Lord. Like we want every line in this verse. Late in time, behold him come, offspring of the Virgin's womb. Veiled in flesh, the Godhead speak. Hail incarnate deity, raised in flesh with us to dwell. Jesus of Emmanuel, on the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Christ doth have one Prince of Peace, hail the Son of righteousness. Light and life to all he brings, risen with healing in his wings. Mild he lays his glory by, born a widow on a death, born to raise us from the earth, born to give a second birth. Hark the angels sing, glory to A newborn king. Good singing, oddly early. Did you see some things? Did you see some things? What'd you see? They get thicker and thicker the farther you go in, or maybe I wasn't ready to write things yet when I was getting started.
About everything.
Just about everything. Who can find one specific? Tell us about a specific one. Harold. Harold. They're doing what? What is the theme it connects to? Sharing, witnessing. Witness, exactly. Witness is all over this song. It's at the beginning of the verses. It's at the end of every verse.
Harold needs to witness.
Yeah, to
Look
tell
here, look
someone,
here.
right?
Here's the king coming.
And
We're
the-
witnessing it.
The hails at the beginning of the third verse, that's all about witnessing. That's all about
I just
witnessing.
think the first, R-E and the last W.
All right, well, we're gonna find some more. What else? What about that fourth line of the first verse? What is that right there?
No, the first
Salvation.
Yeah, the
Reconciled.
reconcile, yeah,
That's a
what?
salvation theme, right?
Mhm.
What?
God and sinners reconciled.
Salvation.
Oh, the S?
Mhm.
Oh, the S.
We got a salvation from the box over here.
Uh-huh,
Yes, wait a
all
minute.
right. What else? We're not gonna cover them all. We don't have time to cover them all, but
Proclaim.
proclaim, more witnessing, exactly, exactly. Where did you find something about identity?
Born in Bethlehem.
I would argue that's about origin, kind of.
Incarnate incarnation.
Incarnate, hail the incarnate deity, that's certainly about incarnation there, right?
Yeah.
So but the first identity I saw was where it said in the second verse, Christ the everlasting Lord. I mean, that's a description, right? But
Second line, newborn king.
newborn king, also an identifier. Son of righteousness is both, that whole line, it's got witness, right? Because it starts with hail. It's got identity. It's also got light, right? What about Zoomers? Did you find any themes you want to share? You're looking.
Oh, let's go to the last, oh, I'm sorry, was someone else talking?
No, go ahead, Cheryl.
Well, at the very end here, all of the borns are salvations, born that we no more may die, born to raise us from the earth, born to give us second birth.
Yes, those are all about how the incarnation leads to salvation, right?
Yes,
God in the flesh, veiled in flesh that God had seen, that's
Right?
more than incarnation, that's conclusion.
Yeah, it's incarnation, it's
Identity.
identity, it's, yeah, identity again there at Jesus, our Emmanuel, but Emmanuel itself is also a relationship with God word, right? God with us, Emmanuel. Yeah. So that's some oranges. I was trying to decide if the phrase late in time, behold him come was kind of a reference to the in the beginning part, like almost a reference to creation. I think that's probably stretching it a little, but that's okay. It's poetry. We can see themes anywhere we want here, right? Any other themes that you saw? This is really mostly just for fun to help us realize how much
it's just chock full of it, yeah.
is packed into some of our hymns. So I encourage you to look at them more closely when we sing. Although they don't all have such, this is a Wesley hymn, so it is of course filled with good theology. Charles Wesley did that. So let's, we're going to turn our attention now. Turn our attention. A minute ahead of schedule. Out of time. Good job. We're going to turn our attention to the other thing that I told you to watch for in this gospel, which is those stories. Okay. We're not going to read the whole rest of the chapter. And there we go. Hi. I'm so happy to find that friendly little, instead of some terrible blaring thing. So, and I turned the snooze off on all of them, so they'll miss them out. So I would like to have someone read the very end of the chapter from verse 43 to 51. We'd like to read chapter 1, verse 40, where it says, Jesus calls Philip and Nathaniel.
What?
Chapter 43 from verse 43.
John 43?
John 1, right there.
Oh, 43.
Yep, start right there. To the end of the chapter.
The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from
Bethsaida.
Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open, the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man."
Thank you.
So
So,
it sounds sort of like the birth story. I mean, it sounds like, come all you faithful. Coming, some angels appearing to the shepherds and.
well, and we skipped a lot of the other things of the come and see parts that happened before that, but I wanted to read this part in particular because as we have mentioned, one of the most important things John is calling us to do is witness. So if you will indulge me, I'm going to testify for just a couple minutes. When I went to seminary when I was 20, well, when I got there, I was still 22 years old. And I was there with a whole lot of people who have done a whole lot more discernment in their lives about why they were there and how they were called than I had lived. I literally hadn't had that much time to do that, right? Because I was only 22 years old. And so I had, I'm not going to get into the story of my call this morning, but let's just say it didn't have anything to do with the heavens opening and heavenly voices coming down. There was no spirit of peace upon me. I was called because God is clever and God used my capacities and my characteristics. God used my arrogance to call me into ministry. And so I got to seminary with a pretty deep inferiority complex about my call story because I knew that didn't seem quite right. Okay, right? I had all these like very sort of dreamy spiritual classmates who were using, Isaiah. I was in the temple and I was smoking. I'm just like, yeah, no, mine's kind of embarrassing. And so my field ed supervisor said to me, "I want you to find a different call story in the Bible that does speak to you. And I think maybe you should look in the New Testament." And that's when I found Nathaniel. And what I see happening here with Nathaniel is that Nathaniel has been chastised his entire life because he cannot help himself from saying the first thing that comes to mind, whether it's polite or not. Right? Oh, we found the from Nazareth. Nazareth apparently has a reputation, right? He's from Alpine. He's from Lakeside. Can anything good come out of it, right? Jesus comes up, and what does he say? Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit, which is the sweetest, most gracious reframing of Nathaniel's incapacity to hold his tongue that I can imagine. Like, you, Nathaniel, have a gift. You cannot help but tell the truth. Bless you. And it just completely disarms him. You are truly the Son of God, right? So if Jesus can call Nathaniel in by taking what has been his burden his whole life, everybody has always given him a hard time about it. He will not keep his mouth shut and says to him, "That is a gift. You have the truth, Nathaniel, and it is a beautiful gift." And he's just like, he's suddenly seeing himself through God's eyes. Never been able to. He's gonna follow Jesus to the very end, and Jesus keeps it up. He's like, I mean, he's like, how do you know? You're converted because I said I saw you under the fig tree. Really? Is that like? And of course, that's not really why Nathaniel was converted. It's not that Jesus somehow recognized him from a distance. Oh yeah, I just walked past there. Why is this a big deal? That the gentleness, the capacity to see all of who you are and see how all of who you are can be used for good. That is what transformed the beginning. And it transformed my understanding of my call story. And it is why I am able to feel like I can be in ministry with integrity as my whole way too big a mouth self. You know, I have other pastor friends and they're like, "Oh, and you said that?" I'm like, "How could I not say that?" And they're like, "Oh, well, I wouldn't have said that. It doesn't seem like a very..." Well, it was the truth. You know, I will say, it is not always a good thing. But I have come to understand that if I can stay by Jesus' side, it can be a better thing more of the time than not. So that is my testimony. I have one more activity. I will just say, I want you to watch for these stories. I'll say this again. We're going to have stories like this all the way through, where Jesus is interacting with other people. But before we go, we are so almost in time. I want you to take one of these. I don't care. It doesn't matter what color it is. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna send them all the same direction. Take one of those and take a marker. Take one and pass them along. Some of those markers aren't going to work very well, so pick the darker ones, obviously, or use your pen. That is also fine. We're going to make bookmarks. We're going to make bookmarks. This is not an art project. I just want you to take one of those slips of paper, and I want you to write one word on it. And that word is from not in this translation. It's not the word I want you to write is behold, which is another way of getting at witness. When you say behold to someone, it means that you are about to show them the presence of God in our midst. Okay? It's getting attention so that we can see the presence of God in our midst. So I invite you to just write the word behold on there, nice and big, with an exclamation point, hopefully. And I have lots of slips of paper, so if you screw it up and want to do another one, that's fine. And then put it in your Bible, and we'll have some bookmarks for next week. Jennifer, can you keep the markers moving, please? What?
I made mine on a Post-it. I have behold on a Post-it in my chapter of John.
Any of you at home, just take a piece of paper, write behold, and put it in there, and we'll know how to find John next week.
Oh.
So that's what I've got for you, friends. So we made it. And I know I did not let you talk much, and I apologize. As we go through, and we're not trying to cover all the things, the entire gospel in one session, I'm assuming there will be more time to participate. So, all right, Zoomers, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Oh, you can't even see me. Oh. Can I see?